Check, check, check. Check, check, check. to meet you, Katie. What's your position? What do you think? Give another minute?
I just want to, we always seem to have problems here.
With the sounds?
Yeah, are we good?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah. But which microphones do you have?
You're going to use
Yeah,
that.
you got to. That's a good microphone. Yeah, I mean, I checked it. But
Okay.
once you start talking, I'll go to the iPad and just kind of
Okay,
test it.
great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, you're on mute, right? Okay. I'm good. Good. We're due for. So once you start, I'll play with this.
I heard that you're like the AV guy too. Is that right?
You gotta kind of do
It's a
everything.
multitasker.
What can you say? Feel free to use this or pick it up, whichever is more.
Okay.
So welcome everybody. Welcome. Everybody wants to take a seat. My name is Rabbi Mark Katz. I'm the rabbi here at Temple Ner Tamid in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Before we start, just a few thank yous. As always, thank you to Kerry Shavat, who is really the curator of this Temple Talk series. Thank you as well to Shirley Colbert, who is the sponsor of this series and really makes this happen. For those who don't know much about our congregation, one of the things we pride ourselves on is becoming a place of discourse. And so over the course of this past year and over the past number of years, since really in my 5+ tenure here, we want to bring community leaders in to talk about some of the most important and pressing issues in our community. And this year, the Jewish community really, our interests intersect with the interests of the wider world and the wider community more in a way than I think I remember in my whole lifetime. You know, it's the war in Gaza, rising anti-Semitism, college campuses. And this is something that we want to hear distinctly from our leaders about, to learn what their agenda is and what their solutions are. And so we're so pleased to have Representative Andy Kim here tonight. I'm going to read his bio, and then I'm going to introduce our interviewer for tonight, Jim Axelrod. Andy Kim is a 3-term member of Congress currently running to represent New Jersey in the United States Senate. Congressman Andy Kim represents New Jersey's 3rd congressional district, which includes parts of South and Central Jersey. Andy is the son of Korean immigrants. He went on to become a Rhodes Scholar and a career public servant, working as a diplomat and a civilian advisor in the commanding generals in Afghanistan. He served on the White House National Security Council staff under President Obama before returning home to unseat one of the leading authors of legislation to repeal the Affordable Care Act. With his win in 2020, Congressman Kim won a district that voted for Trump and became the first Democrat to be reelected from this district since before the Civil War. In 2022, he won a historic three-peat by double digits. Andy has been a leading champion to lower costs for American families, including by authoring legislation to lower prescription drug costs. He has also become one of the strongest voices in the fight against corruption in our broken politics. Andy is the proud father of two young boys, raising them for just a few miles from where he grew up in New Jersey. Jim Axelrod has been working for decades for CBS News. He's not only a treasured member of the media, but also a treasured member of our community as well. And we get not only him, but his brother and his family, and now his mom, who are members of our community.
Doing our part.
He's done a number of these interviews, and every single time that he does, he brings his keen intellect, but also his pathos and his pulse on the finger, not only of the American community, but of the Jewish community. And so we are overjoyed to have him at the microphone tonight as well. Thank you. So without further ado, our conversation.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. And good evening, Representative Kim. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
I will admit there is a part of this evening that is distinctly painful. You are the first candidate for the United States Senate who I've interviewed born after I graduated high school. So, thanks for that.
So it's painful for you,
It's
not
pain-
me.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying, yeah.
So I want to start with some breaking news, actually. I'm sure you've been following what was reported as Hamas saying that it had accepted a ceasefire proposal, which, of course, we all might read with an arched eyebrow, if not some other expression of skepticism. I'm wondering what you know about this supposed proposal. I can tell you from some CBS reporting that I read into, a diplomat briefed on the talk says there's 3 stages, each is 6 weeks long: permanent ceasefire, a hostage prisoner swap, allowing displaced Gazans home, Gaza reconstruction. But of course, the war cabinet in Israel said, we're going to continue our operation in Rafah. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the exact details, but I've seen a lot of what you said. But I think what we see there is the continued disconnect. And that's something that frustrates me immensely as someone who's worked in diplomacy before. I've been at the negotiating table. I know how challenging these discussions can be, but just they're not even working off the same sheet of music. It doesn't look like. It just seems like whatever ceasefire proposal was discussed there is not at all what's been looked over and agreed upon from Israel's side either. So it's frustrating. I've had a chance to be able to talk to the Secretary of State about this recently. I mean, I have to say, I've worked with Tony Blinken a lot in the past. There's no one I would rather have, trying to engage on these types of issues. He's tireless about it, but it is enormously difficult, especially when we are trying to deal with an actor like Hamas that just, we cannot trust in terms of what agreements they might come to.
So just in terms of how you would characterize this, from everything you know and from your grounding in this kind of work, is it a serious proposal, or is it Hamas just sort of trying to string everybody along and build some sort of leverage?
Look, I without seeing it, I mean, I know that Israel said that they will, they will continue to send mediators there to be able to continue these conversations, and I think that's important. You got to make sure you stay engaged and try to have those types of breakthroughs. But I don't know exactly how serious this is. I will say, Egypt and Qatar have been engaged in this process. They're immensely integral to the process that's been created. So hopefully we can see something build out, but it's something I don't want to come across too skeptical at this point, because look, I do think that it's important that we try to find a diplomatic agreement.
I'm always pessimistic in these situations because Pessimists can only be pleasantly surprised. Optimists are bitterly disappointed, right? So let's start from a place of pessimism. We'll get back to this, and we'll get back to the very many issues that the situation, the Israel-Hamas war, raises so many questions. But first, this is really an opportunity for a lot of folks to sort of get to know you. This has all happened so quickly with your candidacy, and I'm sure you're doing a lot of work. Since your district is South Jersey, there's a lot of inroads you have to make in Bergen and Essex County, and you're doing it as an Eagles fan. So, yeah, exactly. Like
I'm losing the crowd already.
yeah, that was quick. But what have you been finding as you've been trying to build name recognition and establish your identity? What's been the biggest challenge?
Well, the first thing I'll start by saying is that I was not planning to run for Senate. This was not something that I had in the works. You know, I got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old at home, 2 little boys, and you know, I already struggled to find time to be able to see them enough. But you know, a lot of times people spend years planning for a statewide run, you know, and they kind of work and lay down that groundwork. You know, I did not have that kind of luxury. So I've been really trying to go and engage and meet as many people as I can. And I guess what I've been heartened by is seeing how engaged and how many people have been paying attention. Now, granted, some of that is because of just the sheer dynamics of this race, you know, both in terms of, you know, the sitting senator and his indictment. But then obviously, you know, I'm sure you all saw it. It's been a very dramatic Senate race so far, you know, in terms of just the different dynamics that are out there. But, you know, what I feel heartened by is I think that there were a lot of people very early on that told me to drop out of this race, told me I didn't have a chance. You know, people told me, you know, look, you know, it's not going to work out for you. Go back to running for re-election in the House. And the way I said it is like, look, I get it. I understand, you know, the dynamics of Jersey politics. I see it with my own eyes. I'm a realist when it comes down to it. But I have every bit as much right to be able to run for this office as anybody else in this state. And so I stuck with it, knowing full well that this could be the end of my political career. But I was really heartened by how many other people, you know, stood up and say, hey, look, give him a chance. You know, and let's see what he has to bring. And this kind of idea that like people in New Jersey don't want to be told who to vote for. They want to make up their own mind. And I just really appreciated the chance that people gave me.
I got to understand a little bit more, though, about the calculus. So Senator Menendez gets indicted last September 22nd. Congressman Kim declares for the Senate September 23rd. So first of all, it must have been a late night while you were doing the calculus. But it's not like you hadn't thought about it, I'm sure. Tell me a little bit, because without this, we're not sitting here. So tell me a little bit about what happened, hearing he was indicted and I'm going to run for the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, look, I didn't realize that the indictment was coming out that day.
But you weren't going to declare the next day anyway.
Wow, I really am honest with you when I say I wasn't planning on this. This was not something that we had in the works. But I mean, I think for me, you know, I read the indictment and something just kind of stuck in me. Like, I'm sure many people feel this, like we live in the time of the greatest amount of distrust in government in modern American history. You know, 84% of people in New Jersey surveyed believe that their elected officials are corrupt. And like, how can a democracy function with that much distrust in the mix? And I feel it too, like, you know, I'm heading down to DC right after this. And I often say, like, I work alongside some people in Congress that I really just believe, like, should not be there. Like, people who are putting their own ego and their ambition ahead of what's right for the country. The way I describe is people who want to, you know, people who are more interested in being social influencers online rather than lawmakers, right? Like, I get to work a job. Like, I'm a son of immigrants, a public school kid that gets to work a job whose job description is in the Constitution of the United States. Like, that is a deeply humbling experience. So, like, I want a, thank you. So, our state deserves, they deserve representation that you don't have to question why that person serves you. So I decided to call for him to step down and resign. Others did as well, but I'll be honest, like I was the first to do it from New Jersey. I thought that could be the end of my political career. But that night, my wife and I started to have a conversation about this. And I told her, like, what role do we have to play? Like, is this something that we feel like we need to engage in? And I said to her the same thing I said in 2017 when I first jumped in for the House of Representatives, which is, I said, I don't want to assume that someone else is going to fight my fights for me. So if I feel something about this, if I feel like this isn't right, the question then is, what am I going to do about it? Not, oh, I hope somebody else does something about this. So, I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. The next morning, I convened, a lot of my political team and past campaign managers on a phone call. And I asked them, if I'm going to consider running against Senator Menendez, what would you advise me? And they told me, we can put together a campaign operation, a website, a video we can launch in 6 months. And then I said, what would you say if I were to launch in 3 hours from now? And I just felt like I had to, because like the whole country was watching. Everyone in New Jersey was watching this. And the last thing I wanted was people to feel like Democrats in New Jersey weren't going to do anything about this. We have so many issues already about indicted politicians. And the difference is I wanted to show that at least in terms of what I believe in, that accountability should be there. And that's what differentiates the party. So I just felt like it was important to take action right away.
All right, as I said, we have a lot of issues to jump into. But before I do, just one more background question. All right, so Phi Beta Kappa graduate of the University of Chicago, Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, congressman at 36. I really do hope you can overcome your lack of achievement. But tell me what the most significant shapers in your life, influences, have been in terms of developing your worldview.
The most important shapers, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I would say two things. I mean, I think this one sounds a little cliche, but my parents were definitely a big influence. But this year is actually 50 years since my parents immigrated from South Korea to the United States. They had a really tough childhood. My dad was someone who was born with polio. He had a tough childhood, spent part of his childhood homeless on the streets. My mom was born to a poor farm family, to a single mom. But here in America, my dad ended up getting a PhD in genetics. My mom ended up becoming a nurse. And they chose jobs. Like my dad is someone who, I told you, suffered from polio and then dedicated his life to trying, he saw great minds and scientists nearly eradicate from this world the plague that disabled him. And he decided he wanted to try to cure the next great diseases. So he tried to cure cancer and Alzheimer's. As I told you, my mom was a nurse. So they had this line when I was younger. They said, service isn't just a job, it's a way of life. Like they wanted me to understand that like service isn't just something you do 9 to 5 and then you stop thinking about service. Like the way they described it is it's about your fundamental relationships to the people around you. It doesn't matter if they're friends or family or strangers, you have a responsibility to them. So, so that idea of service was strong. The other thing that I'll say is, I won't go too far into this, but I went to this very bizarre school for 2 years called Deep Springs College. Probably no one's ever heard of this thing, but
so like 12 graduates,
someone heard it. Okay, Deep Springs College. It was a replacement for my first 2 years in college. They only accept 13 students a year. It's 26 students total. And you live and work on a cattle ranch in the California mountains while you study the great book. So it's this very bizarre, amazing school that's about trying to shape people for lives of service to humanity. So again, that word service is there. And I happened to be out there when September 11th happened. So me as a Jersey kid out in the high Sierra, high deserts of the Sierra Nevadas, stuck out there, uncertain what's happening to my home region. Being from New Jersey, it hit us. We know a lot of people in our communities that were affected. And so it was really there where I just decided to make that pledge to myself to serve this country. You know, it was if it wasn't for September 11th and that experience, I'd be probably you know, a mediocre microbiologist somewhere. That's what I was going into college to study. And then, you know, I just completely pivoted. So, you know, I was at college on September 11th. By the 10th anniversary of September 11th, I was working as a diplomat in Kabul, Afghanistan. And then on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, I'm a congressman representing New Jersey that's at Ground Zero, observing the 20th anniversary. So that definitely set in motion this arc of my life. And, you know,
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
And forgive me for not knowing the answer to this. Are your parents still alive?
Yes, they are.
So what do they think when they look at their kid who has fulfilled, they gave you a mission, and you have fulfilled it?
Well, I mean, look, I deeply disappointed them by not becoming a doctor or a lawyer. So, like
You know the old joke, my other son.
I will forever have to try to you know, move on from that. But look, I mean, I'm a parent now. Like, there's nothing that a parent wants more than for their kid to find something that just drives their passion, right? And you know, my mom was there on the, you know, she was in the gallery of the House of Representatives when I was swearing my oath, and you know, there were 0 Korean Americans in Congress at that time. I'm being sworn in as the only Korean American in Congress at the age of 36. You know, if I get elected to the U.S. Senate, I'll be the first Korean American ever in the Senate. I'd be the first Asian American in the U.S. Senate from the entire East Coast of America. So, you know, I think, you know, especially this year being 50 years since they immigrated, I think that they feel like this country has more than lived up to the opportunities that inspired them 50 years ago to be able to come. Because they didn't know anybody. We have no family, no friends here. My parents literally did not know anyone else in the entire Western Hemisphere of planet Earth 50 years ago. But they took a chance because of just what America meant to them at the time.
I wonder what the Korean word is for kvel. the swelling of pride. It just must be wonderful. All right, so we had a really wonderful event here a couple of months ago. Representative Cheryl was here, and we spoke about anti-Semitism. And she surprised me and a lot of other folks in the room that night by telling us she had gone to a Jewish preschool. And she had learned, I think the first things she made were Hanukkah menorahs or something as a 4-year-old. You grew up in Cherry Hill.
Yes, yes.
Did you grow up with Jewish kids?
Like it felt like my entire school was Jewish.
Cherry Hill East.
Yeah, Cherry Hill East. Yeah, I just kind of assumed that every school takes off all those holidays, and I remember, you know, especially, you know, when I'm, you know, 12, 13 years old, you know, going every single weekend to a bar mitzvah. I thought I was so cool drinking like Shirley Temples, and it just became such a habit of just like a ritual every single weekend. I remember asking my parents, like, when's my turn? I just kind of assumed that everybody has a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah at some point. So yeah, it was something I didn't realize that was, you know, I didn't even pay attention to that. It was just kind of our being at that time.
So it was in the air around you, like the sensibility of Jews being people that you were living your life with and around.
Yeah.
So I couldn't help but notice, and we're going to move to Israel next, but I just have to follow up on one more thing as I was reading about you. Hobbies, guitar, okay, bagel making? I read that you were really into bagel making.
Yeah, that's funny.
I told you it was going to be hard hitting.
So as I told you, when I was out in California, not a good bagel anywhere nearby. So I started to learn bread making, bagel making, and it's become this big hobby of mine. I actually even teach some bagel making classes, and when I left being a diplomat, I had not, at that point, I would just focus on being a dad. When my first kid was born, I left government service to just focus on being a dad. And I kind of, picked back up bagel making in a serious way. And actually I had like business designs to actually start a bagel company, like a bagel store. but then ended up running for Congress. I always wonder what would have happened in that other path, you know.
A very common either or. All right, let's talk about some headlines from last week. All right, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, co-authored by Representative Gottheimer. So the headline I saw, House approves anti-Semitism bill, co-authored by Gottheimer. Second headline, Kim, Watson Coleman, are lone no votes from New Jersey. So first line of the story, responding to a wave of pro-Palestine protests and in some cases anti-Semitic incidents at colleges and universities around the country, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill co-authored by Representative Josh Gottheimer today to codify a broad definition of anti-Semitism in anti-discrimination investigations. Now, that's a bill that the author called a critical step we can take to stand against hate. And you voted no.
Yeah.
You really want to be on the wrong side of that?
Well, look, thank you for raising this, because it's something that I want to explain, because you know, I understand how terrifying this moment is for so many people. And I've talked to a number of parents, especially parents of college-age kids. I certainly don't discount the severity of what's happening and how frightening it is in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism. The way that I've tried to approach this is a couplefold. Is that, yes, we need to be able to focus in on the urgency of this matter and make sure we're responding to this crisis right now. But we also need to make sure we're approaching this in a comprehensive way. You know, we have a United States, we have a national strategy now on combating anti-Semitism, a multifaceted approach that's laid out there. And the third thing is that I believe that if our nation's going to act, especially Congress is going to act to address anti-Semitism, we should try by all means to try to do so in as unified of a way as possible. And politics should not be part of that process. And so the reason why I was frustrated this past week is, yes, we need to respond and try to tackle the challenges that we face as a nation to rising anti-Semitism. But we should do so in a way that meets the moment. You know, so right now there is a piece of legislation called the Countering Anti-Semitism Act. It is something that has bipartisan support. It has bicameral support in the Senate and the House. And many of us were urging the Speaker to bring this up, because this is one that addresses the issues about education and colleges, just like the other one. It does so in a way that I think alleviates any concerns about freedom of speech and the First Amendment, and again, does so in a bipartisan way. But it also surges resources for the nonprofit security grant, for instance, to make sure that temples and synagogues around the country can be able to hire security guards. It surges way forward when it comes to Holocaust education in this country. It would create a national coordinator, a White House national coordinator on combating anti-Semitism. It would create an interagency task force on combating anti-Semitism. It would mark this month, May, as Jewish Heritage Month. You know, it would do a lot to try to combat this in a comprehensive way.
So if I understand it, I think it's critically important that everybody in this room walks out with an understanding of what your reasoning is. If I understand it, there was the bill you voted no on, and then there's a alternative, Countering Anti-Semitism Act, and that's the one you say has more teeth.
Much more teeth, much more resources, and we were urging the Speaker to pull this forward, and so he had a choice this week to put forward that bill or this narrower bill that, again, sort of has concerns regarding First Amendment that the other one doesn't. And I just feel like, you know, if you're going to do it in a comprehensive way and do it in a way that can be as unified as possible.
But because of your vote, you're sitting here answering questions like this.
Fair enough.
And so sometimes the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yeah, I understand that, but I think for me, look, this is something that, as I've gone around, look, it's challenging. The nuances are often hard to convey, but when I'm there trying to vote, I am earnestly trying to think through this in terms of like what I think is going to be able to best deliver for my constituents and for this moment. And if the speaker moves forward with this other bill as he did, like I think it's just a missed opportunity on all this other stuff that we actually need to be able to move forward on. And I don't know if that bill is ever going to get a vote now. And so I think that the speaker made a political decision. And I just think that that's not the right approach when it should be coming to anti-Semitism. It shouldn't be about, trying to make a political point or trying to position this issue for an election. A speaker should try to be thinking about what legislation is going to be most effective and have the broadest support base so that we can show that we are unified as a country in combating anti-Semitism.
I don't want to belabor the point, and I do appreciate your candor and your frankness in answering this. But if I could read the thought bubbles over many heads out here, it basically saying, look, we need a win right now. Jews need a W. And now is not the time to choose something to put yourself in the minority. It's like, is this the hill you want to die on? When you could get something passed that you could then deal with in conference, you can deal with later. You got to deal with it now this way by voting against it?
Yeah, look, I respect that a lot. I respect that opinion a lot, and I hope people, even if they disagree with my vote, I hope they appreciate and recognize, the work that I've tried to do on combating anti-Semitism for years. That this was a place of trying to say, hey, look, we deserve better, we deserve more, and hopefully we can continue to push. I'm going to continue to push the speaker to be able to bring the other bill up for a vote. The Senate, that's the bill that the Senate actually wants to be able to move forward on. So hopefully we'll see the Senate move forward on that, have it come back to the House of Representatives.
You used a very interesting word in your explanation, earnest. You earnestly believed what you were voting. And yet I know that when this gets to the general election and you're running against a Republican, I read one, not the front runner, but a Republican candidate who said, this is no surprise, as Andy Kim has proven himself to be no better than the Iranian mullahs at protecting the fundamental rights of Jews. And by the way, that hits hard for you when we start talking about Iranians, right?
Yeah, look, I understand that, but like for me, like I'll tell you, like I never thought that I would be in politics. This is not something I aspired towards. I'm someone who I'm a public servant. I was a career diplomat. I worked under Republicans and Democrats. So I promised myself that when I got into Congress, that I would not try to make critically important decisions based off of how that might affect my own election or re-election or things of that nature. So, I made the decision that I thought was best in terms of trying to, keep open the possibility for this other bill to come forward if we didn't show some discontent to the speaker, I just think that would close the door on the other bill getting through. So that was a decision that I made, and I'll own up to that. But look, what I hope people will get to see as I come through and continue to introduce myself across the state is like, look, I've been a diplomat in my career. I've worked in the Middle East. I've worked out in war zones. I spent a good chunk of my time in national security focused on trying to counter Iranian violence all over the Middle East. A lot of what I tried to do was to stop the Quds Force and then, General Qasem Soleimani from engaging in attacks, whether through, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other actors. So this is something that I worked on well before my time in politics. And so as a result, I want to make sure that information gets out there, and then the voters can make a decision about whether or not they think I'm earnest about, my commitment to trying to protect Israel as well as to combat anti-Semitism.
So let's broaden out. Let's follow up on just that last point you just made. In your view, why the spike in anti-Semitism in this country? What's going on?
Well, I think sadly, it was something that, we've seen for a long time. I think it just is much more out in the open. And I think that's in part because we just see, we see a level of hate and discrimination rising across the board, people feeling much more willing and open to be public. And, frankly, sadly, other public officials and politicians sometimes, inflame that. and engage in that. I mean, I think about, for instance, my own family's experience when it's come to the rising anti-Asian hate over the last few years, and just seeing how much of that has spiked and how much vitriol, we've experienced in our own family life and in our community. But then, with anti-Semitism, it's something that's been a problem for so long, something that's been there, but then it's just kind of out in the open in this way that's just been weaponized so often. And I think that, you're seeing so much of that manifest in ways, and I hear so many people saying they never thought in their lifetime that it would be something to this level and to this magnitude. And unfortunately, we don't even know, what trajectory it's on. And it feels like, that it's so pervasive, it's so out in the open, and just the ease with which people say such hateful, hurtful, anti-Semitic comments. I think that that's something that just, is shocking, but unfortunately it's just part of the world right now, and that's why we need to make sure we're stepping up against it so strongly.
Tell us what you think about our post-October 7th world. How has your thinking evolved about the Israel-Hamas war since October 8th?
Yeah. Well, I think it really hits home the concerns about just, about existential threat, and about just the lack of recognition of just the existence of Israel, and how that is not just in words, but you see how real that is. And I think that that's something that really hit it home to me. I mean, look, as someone who's not Jewish myself, to try to understand and empathize in that way. I mean, look, it's not a perfect analogy here, but as I mentioned, my ancestral homeland is South Korea. My entire family, apart from my immediate family, still lives there in South Korea. And they live there under just a few kilometers from North Korea, where you have a brutal dictator there pointing nuclear weapons directly at, my ancestral homeland. And there's always this worry of annihilation, always this worry about how much nuclear weapons there on the peninsula has changed things. I think that, again, that's not a perfect analogy here, but it helps me try to find a place where I can understand some of the fear that people are facing, whether the Jewish community here or in Israel, of just what it means to have to be that close to a danger that just simply doesn't believe you should exist, and has a means by which to be able to attack, and as we saw on October 7th, unleash a level of terror that me, as someone who worked in counterterrorism for nearly a decade, still shook me to my core in terms of just how brutal and savage it was. And so, that was something that I'll certainly never forget, that feeling of what it was when I first heard about just how brutal this all was, and has really hit home just, how much worry there is about not just the day-to-day life, but just the future of Israel and its existence.
Can you characterize for us your sense of the war that the Israeli government has prosecuted since October 7th? Do you feel there needs to be a course correction in how this war unfolds? Or are you okay with what you're seeing?
Well, certainly they have the right to be able to engage in self-defense after an attack of that magnitude. It was horrific, and the U.S. has been supportive of that effort. But look, what I would say is that 7 months onwards, that we've gotten to 7 months onwards, as someone who's worked at the my first job in government was at the U.S. Agency for International Development. I am worried about the likely potential for famine up in northern Gaza. I do think that that's something that we can work on collectively to be able to better address, try to be responsive to. And that, I think, is, when we look at this in terms of the long-term security of Israel, when we look at the challenges that we're facing, you mentioned it earlier on in terms of the diplomatic situation right now. I am concerned about what comes next, possibly with Rafah. When you see Egypt and Saudi Arabia and others that we've been trying to figure out how to normalize relations across the Arab world when it comes to Israel, trying to think through what is the long-term security that can be imagined there. I do have concerns and worries about how this moves forward.
And when you look at what's happening on American campuses, do you see that as an expression of protest against the Israeli government, or do you see acts that are anti-Semitic?
Well, I certainly see certainly a number of things we've seen have crossed that line. We've certainly seen when we hear people say, go back to Poland, other things like that, clearly anti-Semitic actions and statements have been made. There is a room, there is a place for legitimate protest in nonviolent ways, but what we've seen a lot of has gone far beyond that.
And why aren't university administrators addressing that?
Yeah, I think that that's been one of the biggest struggles that we've faced. In terms of trying to understand how to try to address this. And I think what's what I find particularly frustrating is that schools are supposed to be places where people can have a depth in discussions and learn and at a deeper level, understand the nuance, but so often what we see are kind of talking points and slogans. And I don't feel like I've seen the kind of space for dialogue and discussion. If people are protesting or raising their concerns, I always saw that as sort of an effort in the past when I've participated in these of trying to build coalitions, trying to persuade people to understand, what you're trying to do. But a lot of what we're seeing isn't necessarily moving in that direction and trying to be able to bring people on board. And it has become just so divisive in that way.
It feels like it's a bigger problem for your party right now to build coalitions involving the range of democratic thinkers. You have the far left, which seem to be the most vocal and aggressive critics of the Israeli government, and sometimes behave in ways that appear to many to be anti-Semitic. And then, if I hear you correctly, you sound to me like a fairly strong supporter of Israel and an understanding, you have an understanding view of why Israel's doing what it's doing. It really feels like the Democratic Party at times is coming apart at the seams.
What I would say is that, and this is something that I'll just say writ large about the challenges I've seen in politics over the course of the last, 5, 6, 7 years I've been in, is that there is, unfortunately, just this enormous pressure within our politics right now to make everything binary, to make everything as if it's just one or the other, and reduce things down to its most simplistic form, which often loses that nuance. Like, I still believe to this day that one can be somebody that supports Israel, supports its rights for existence, to support the protection of people, but still have concerns and worry about Palestinian civilians and humanitarian assistance. And I do not think that those are mutually exclusive. And I think that that's a broader problem within our politics, not just in the Democratic Party, but just I see it in so many other aspects. This is probably one of the most pronounced that I've ever seen. It's certainly one of the most emotional and challenging that I've ever seen, if not the most. But it's challenging when it feels like everything's being painted with such broad brushes. And so, look, that is something that we're going to have to confront. These are unbelievably complicated, complex issues. But if we just reduce things down and just try to tear our country into two factions, I think we're going to be worse off. And I think that that's going to have huge problems in so many other fronts. And it feeds into what we were talking about earlier, just this level of vitriol and hate that we have, this otherization that is happening. We live in an America where Like we're losing touch with the idea that we're part of something bigger than all of us. And I mean, like we live in a time when like 50% of Americans surveyed will say that they believe people in the other political party are the enemy. Like that is dangerous. That's the kind of mentality that leads to or keeps or creates the conditions for something like January 6th. So, I want us to be mindful about just how toxic of a situation that we're in writ large, that we find ourselves unfortunately moving into. But yes, I do think that, certainly myself, other elected officials, and people in both parties need to be thinking about how the words that we use, the actions that we do sometimes make this even worse.
I want to invite the rabbi up in a sec, but I want one more question before we do. A recent Time magazine interview, I don't know if you folks saw this interview, but there was an interview of Donald Trump last week, and he spelled out his plans for what would essentially be an imperial presidency, complete with withholding funds appropriated by Congress, firing U.S. attorneys who don't carry out his orders to prosecute somebody, free those in prison for breaking the law on January 6th. Oh, he also wants to allow red states to monitor women's pregnancies. Now, people often say, you, I'm sure, have similar conversations. It's not going to be that bad. We got checks and balances. Relax. In your view, what does this country look like under a second Donald Trump presidency?
Yeah. I mean, look, I tend to, unfortunately, have to believe him when he says the things that he says, just given what we've seen in the past. Like I said, I told you before, I never thought I'd be in politics. I stepped up because of just my concerns about what Trump would do in the White House back in the first term. As I told you, I worked there at the White House before. Like I've seen the power of the presidency, and I know how dangerous it can be in the wrong hands. And so, I'm worried about that. And to the point you said about checks and balances, I think one thing that we learned about politics, especially after 2016, 2017, is that a lot of the things that we thought were checks and balances in this country ended up just being norms, ended up just being behavior that required someone to abide by the normal behavior, norms of our country. But if you have someone that just doesn't care about that, there's very little that we can do to stop them sometimes. And I just think that was what was so alarming when we understood just how challenging it was, which is why I stepped up to flip the House of Representatives, because that was something very tangible that we could do to try to put a check in that space. And certainly, the prospects of a Trump presidency, very much factor into my own decisions about being in Congress, trying to be in a place where I think I can be able to engage, because I don't want someone like Donald Trump making decisions and shaping the kind of America that my kids are growing up in.
So as a lawmaker who voted in the 117th Congress 100% of the time with Joe Biden, let me ask you, is Joe Biden the most effective articulator of the principles that would form a foundation for beating Donald Trump? Not what's inside him, articulator, and person who can create a groundswell, a person who can build the cohesion necessary to beat Donald Trump. Is Joe Biden the guy?
Well, I think Joe Biden's the guy right now who can show the proven experience of having led some of the most effective and accomplished legislative wins in a long, long time. Someone who has shown forth in that vision, and that's someone I've gotten to see. I worked closely with him when he was the vice president at the White House. Certainly seeing this experience, I think he does have the experience that we need.
I'm not
right
asking
now
about
to
his
engage.
experience, though. I'm asking about your
You're
confidence
talking about
level.
the articulation? Is that what you said?
I'm talking
Yeah.
about the feeling I hear more and more from people in the middle or even center left who say, you know what, he's just not inspiring confidence. Does that ever cross your mind that you need somebody? And I watched Gavin Newsom debate Ron DeSantis. Wipe the floor with him.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, does it concern you at all?
Look, as someone who's worked there at the White House before, I have a sense of what I think the president should, what the qualities I want in the president. And I kind of laid these out before. I want somebody who has been tested, someone I know can stay calm under pressure. I want somebody that I believe knows how to make a decision, because I've seen a lot of very high-level people really fail at the ability to actually make a decision, especially under pressure. And I want somebody that I know has a strong moral compass. Those three have always been kind of how I articulate based on my experiences of having worked with someone in the Oval Office, in the Situation Room. Sure, always all of us hope that we can be able to better articulate our positions and whatnot, and that's always something that I think we can try to push and improve, and that is no doubt a part of being president in terms of being able to be a communicator. And I'm sure he's going to continue to try to improve that. I still try to improve that with myself. But in terms of in terms of what I think are the key essential parts of being a president, those 3 points that I articulated, that's something that I've deduced from my own experience working at the White House, and I do see in Joe Biden someone that meets the moment in that way.
Rabbi, could you come on up? This is my favorite part of the night when we bring in Rabbi Katz to ask a couple of questions as well.
So we've talked a lot actually about, over the past number of weeks, the First Amendment has come up. And I am actually curious, we'll get to free speech in a second, but one other piece of that amendment is about the role of religion and being a religious individual who engages in social justice. We've watched religion work really well in the public discourse and religion not work well in the public discourse. And I'm curious, as a leader, what do you see as the role of religion in the public discourse?
I think that, first of all, great question. I think that, to the point I said earlier about, our moral compass, about, what gives us a sense of the injustices that we're trying to fix, where our drive is. Certainly I think religion can play a really important part in people earnestly talking about what drives them, how they choose the types of issues that they want to see fixed. I think within our society, it's important, though, to talk about that within the broader context of plurality, and I think that sometimes we lose sight of that, and that's, where sometimes we see it go wrong. I think, like, if there's one word that I try to associate with the politics I practice, it's humility, but too often we see kind of a politics of hubris, where people try to say, I know all the right answers, or, I'm on the right side of history, you're not. And that can be a real challenge on that front. So I think in the right way, with that humility, with that sense of plurality, I think that, religion can play a really powerful role in articulating what we think we want to see get done. But also it can be a great organizer as well, a place in which people can collectively say, this is something that's important to us. And this is something that reflects our values.
Got another one?
Yeah, well, now that we're on the First Amendment, I want to talk about this question of, where the lines are drawn about the First Amendment. This has been one of the fundamental issues with what's going on the college campuses right now. And I'm curious, where is the line between free speech and hate speech? And how does one draw the line? And especially in light of anti-Semitism, where, yes, there are really overt anti-Semitic phrases that are said, but most of the problems that the Jewish community has with the protests are actually the dog whistles. It's the very subtle things that are said that ring really anti-Semitic to our ears, but may not feel so anti-Semitic to others. And that may not actually cross the line. And so I am curious where you feel like the line is drawn, and how do you monitor that line?
No, you're right. This is probably one of the most complicated issues, especially revolving around the protests that we've seen. And I think it kind of gets at some of the issues with the legislation that we talked about earlier, and why I think we have to be very careful about what definition to be able to attach this to. I'll be very honest with you. I'm not going to tell you that I have some perfect list of, these are acceptable phrases, these are not. I think people who are much more involved, people who, have, as you said, experienced this on a much more visceral level, can be able to explain, how they feel and what harm they feel, how fearful they feel. That's important for me to hear, for others to be able to hear in terms of that. But that's again why I think it's important for us to have that deeper discussion about what kind of definition should be used in making these types of determinations. And that's something that I felt like didn't happen enough in Congress before we move forward in that way. But listing out those types of examples, but doing so in a way where we can really try to understand what would fit into those different categories. Like I said, I don't have a perfect understanding of it right now, but that's exactly the kind of conversation we need to have as a country. But so often right now, that's being, that it feels impossible.
But let me follow up on this. And this room is hearing this in large part in a very specific way. And I'm not even asking about legislation. So I got a kid at Northwestern, okay? And a couple of weeks ago, there was a protest in front of the Hillel at Northwestern, okay? Where my kid has a cappella practice. And the dean of students of Northwestern shows up at Hillel to make sure the protesters' rights of free speech were protected. Okay? Think about this for a second, because I think about it when I write the tuition check. And here's what really upset me about this. I was thinking if other protesters showed up at another minority group's place of gathering, would the dean of students showed up to make sure that the people protesting, pick your minority, pick your marginalized group, that it would be their rights to protest these people would be protected? No. So I think what a lot of people in this room feel, why when it's the Jews is it okay? Because that's what a lot of people are feeling right now as we're trying to digest what's happening in this country.
Yeah. No, look, and that's something that I've heard from a lot of parents, especially over the course of the last couple weeks, worried about exactly that, just feeling like this is something that, as we said before, feels unprecedented in quite some time, and wondering whether or not that would actually happen in other circumstances. So I totally understand and recognize that that particular fear, and exactly why it is that I think we need to be moving forward in that comprehensive way to try to address to try to have those kind of engagements. But what happens so often is in Congress or elsewhere, sometimes we just make things worse by just injecting the politics into it and whatnot, and preventing that kind of real conversation from actually happening. So, it certainly pains me to hear that. And I think, one thing we can certainly say is, when people feel unsafe, when they are blocked from being able to do the types of, be able to have the kind of go about their daily lives, having that kind of fear, having that kind of challenge, I think that's clearly showing, just how problematic things are right now.
I know you have a long ride back to South Jersey, and I want to ask you one more question before we wrap up. So you're about, it seems to me, to be the Democratic candidate for the race for the Senate seat in New Jersey, where sharp elbows and brass knuckle politics are the rule. And I've had a lovely conversation, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that you are conducting your intellectual business up here. It's wonderful, and I mean that. And I have such respect for your backstory. Are you going to be able to throw haymakers? Do you have in you the capacity to go bare knuckles?
Yeah. So.
Diplomat?
What I hope people have seen, I mean, look, I stepped up and won a congressional district in a district that Trump won by 6 points. He won it in 2020, and I still won. I outperformed Joe Biden by 8 points to be able to win that. I was one of only 7 Democrats in the country to win a district Trump won that year. I stepped up to run for Senate the day after the indictment, come out fast, show bold decision-making in that capacity. Stayed in the race despite the fact that I was now running against the most powerful political family in the state when the First Lady came in. Showed that I was willing to even file a lawsuit against the state of New Jersey because I thought something was wrong. That was not an easy decision to make. So what I would say is I had my first boss at the State Department, he had this line, he said, you don't have good government unless you have good people working in government. And I think that's true. I think it's important for us to recognize that the quality of our government is about the quality of people in the government. But he also had this follow-on line. He said, you can be a good person and still have sharp elbows too. And so, I get it. Like what I try to explain to people is don't try to equate leadership and think that leadership is about the volume of one's voice or about the sharpness of their vocabulary. Like for me, I am a coalition builder. I'm somebody who's been very effective in the ways that I have to be able to try to get the things that I need to get done. And we've seen as we build not just a campaign in this state, but I feel like we built a real movement right now for a better democracy, reforms, to be able to get things done. So I feel very confident in my ability to be able to get things done. And frankly, I think people are ready for a different kind of politics. I think people don't want the same old that we've had. And I hope I can show them, not just in my words, but they can see through my own experience what I've accomplished, what I've tried to do to be able to serve this country that I love so much.
Well, let me thank you on behalf of everybody in this room for, among other things, I ask a lot of questions that don't get straight answers, especially when the subject of the question is asking you to explain something that probably isn't popular in the room. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you for your presence, and I hope you will come back here when the title is senator.
Indeed. So I want to thank Jim Axelrod, Representative Andy Kim. I was struck, Congressman, listening to you. One of my favorite teachings in Judaism is this question about, in traditional Judaism, lots of people get monikers, right? Joseph is called Joseph Hatzadik, Joseph the righteous one. And Moses gets this moniker, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher. But what's funny, and this was taught to me by one of my professors, Lenny Kravitz, not the singer, that, he asked this question, why is it that Moses was called Moses our teacher and not Moses the prophet, right? Moses clearly heard from God, spoke with God, spoke God's word. And the answer that he gave, looking at a line in the Torah, is that all a prophet has to do is hear God's word and parrot it back to the people. It almost doesn't matter whether the people listen to them. And for the most part, if you read the prophets in the Bible, the people don't listen to them. But a teacher has to speak in such a way that it moves people, in such a way that it gets stuff done. A teacher is inherently pragmatic, whereas a prophet is inherently prophetic. And what I've appreciated from you is, yes, you've got a vision, but also I got a real sense of pragmatism from you. The sense of understanding the way the world works, of needing to get things done. And every single one of us is moved tonight by the way that you spoke. And so we thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can I say one last thing? I just wanted to share one last thing. Your comments were very poignant there, and I wanted to just share one last story here because I think it gives you a sense of why I'm in public service and why I try to do what I do. So I told you I worked at the State Department. I worked as a diplomat. I served out in a war zone out in Afghanistan. I came back to the State Department in DC to work there. And I remember one day I showed up to work and there was a white envelope on my keyboard. And I didn't know why, so I opened up this envelope and I read this letter that was put on my keyboard. And my jaw dropped because what the letter said is that I've now been banned from working on issues related to the Korean Peninsula because I'm Korean American. That they have deemed me somehow a potential security concern. And I just felt humiliated that my employer, which happens to be the United States government, while I was in a war zone serving this country in harm's way, that they were doing some secret investigation of me and had somehow come to the conclusion that they couldn't trust me. And what it made me feel like is it made me feel like they were saying, basically they were saying that they didn't feel like I was 100% loyal to this country. And that ended up making me feel like they were basically saying I'm not 100% American, that I'm American until my heritage. And I get it. I share a last name with an axis of evil dictator. I get it. You know, the challenges that come with growing up with that kind of, coming from that kind of heritage. But it was tough, and it was something that made me feel like I didn't belong in government, and maybe I didn't have a place there. So I thought about leaving government and just leaving public service. But to the point, this is why, to the point you're talking about, just, how I try to think about affecting change, I decided that, look, I don't want to do that because that's then just perpetuating this sense that I don't, that people like myself that come from the backgrounds that we do, that we don't have a place in government. I want to prove that wrong. In the same way that when I ran for Congress, people didn't think I could win a district that's 85% white, less than 3% Asian, simply because of the vast majority of people didn't look like me. And we've proven that wrong 3 times. And then now, what I'll just end you on is that now that I'm in Congress, I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee that now has oversight over the State Department. And I've been able to, raise my own personal experiences directly to the Secretary of State and talk about how, if we're going to be a country that says our diversity is our strength, then we need to mean it. And not just have that be some pleasantry that we say, but then go about worried about, loyalty tests and this and that. So I just raise that story because this is hard. These challenges that we face are difficult, but we have to stay engaged. And I've been saying this line a lot lately. People might have heard me say, I believe that the opposite of democracy is apathy. It's if we give up. And I just hope you see in me as someone who just refuses to give up. And I will just keep fighting and trying to find different ways to be able to make the impact that we deserve because, again, I still believe in this. And as a father of a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, I refuse to believe that my kids are doomed to grow up in a broken America. I refuse to believe that this chaos and this crisis that's out there right now in the world just is the new normal. So, yes, it's crazy, it's hard, and no one in this room has 100% of all the right answers for us how to navigate it. But if we can try to have, that sense of collectivity that will work together, that humility, that understands that empathy is a strength, not a weakness, and we can try to be able to engage together, that's how I think we can do that. So I hope to have a chance to be able to serve this state. And if so, I hope to be able to engage with so many of you going forward to try to address all these challenges that we can face. No guarantees we can fix it all, but we better, we gotta at least try. Otherwise, we give into that apathy and that helplessness. So thank you for letting me be able to say a few words here.
Thank you to Kerry Shavat. Thank you to Shirley Colbert for sponsoring tonight. And as I say at the end of each one of these, make sure to meet someone new on your way out.
Can we just take a photo? Yeah. Sure. That was great, by the way. Really
Yeah.
great.
That was awesome. Thank
But
you.
Jim, you didn't make me cry this time. What happened?
Taking a
You
night
call
off
me
from the
later?
tears.
That's an inside joke. Oh, yeah. I watched him on CBS. He had everything he cried. So I have to find a happy story.
Tony, where do you want us?
Right here. Let me move this.